In this video, I'll show you how to extend your bot's animations to include jumping, hanging off of a ledge, and climbing up onto it. So we're going to begin with this starter project, which you can download with this video. Press play, you should be able to wander around. And there'll be physics on the bot, so you run into the container and the other objects that are in the scene. Now, if we just do a quick investigation of what we've got here, we've got the Y-bot, and on the Y-bot, he's got a script called climb up attached to him. And if you have a look inside of that script, you'll find code that we've used before. So he starts off with a speed and a rotation. We've then got a lerp speed that we're actually using to align him with our anchor point, like we did with the chair example, but we don't have that anchor point yet. We've got the animation. We've got a variable to say whether he's hanging or not. And we also have an anim root target, which is the target node that we're going to lerp to. It's our anchor. It's the same as the chair's anchor. Now, the difference with this code to the previous one is that in the previous one, we had most of the code doing the work on the actual object itself. So on the chair, it was doing the work for this animation. Now, this time around, we're putting all of this code onto the bot. So, you can do it whatever works for you. So this is just another method for doing it. Now, the lerping animation that we're not using right now, even though the code's in there, is pretty much the same as code that we've had before, where it's basically aligning the position of your character with the root target, which is the anchor, basically. It's called anim root target in this code. All right, so then we have a start function, which is grabbing hold of our animator and also setting our root target to null to say that we don't have a root target at this point. We've got our fixed update that will run our lerp when we have a root target. And then we have the update function that you'll be familiar with the vertical and horizontal axes and moving around. So that's what's giving us our movement so far. Now, the animation itself, if we go into the animator and just have a look in here, you'll see we have the idle and the walking animations already set up with the is walking Boolean value for true if you want to go from idle to walking over here, and it will be false when we come back. All right, so that's what we've got. Now, the next thing we want to do is put in a jump animation when we press the space bar. So the first thing we'll need is our actual jump animation. So if you come down into your assets and have a look through all of the different animations, you'll have one here, jumping on the spot. Grab hold of that and drag and drop it into your scene. So that's our jump up. Now we're going to trigger this with a transition from idle to jump up. And we'll create a new parameter. So go up to here and create a trigger, is jumping. And then on this transition from idle to jump, you want to set the condition to be is jumping. So when that gets triggered, it will jump. You also want to turn off the has exit time so that it will immediately go out of the idle into jump. And then you want to transition back without any conditions or exit times. So he'll jump and then he'll come back. Right, so now we just need to add a little bit of code into our climb script that will do that for us. So open that up. And we'll add that code just below where we're checking for our translation for walking. So just below that if-else statement, we're going to add in this one here. So we're going to test if the input key pressed or key down is space, then we will trigger is jumping. So there are the 4 lines of code to add. Save that, go back to Unity, and we'll try it out. So press play, hit the space bar, he will jump and come back down again. Great. So now what we want to do is to be able to walk up to this container, jump, and have the bot hang off of this rail as though he's jumped up and reached it. So we have to transition from a jump into a hanging. So we'll need to add our hanging animation into our animator. Now, if you have a look around, you'll find in the assets a hanging idle animation, which will look like this, and just drag and drop that into your animator. We'll transition from jump up into hanging idle, so make a transition, and in that, the trigger that will cause this to go is going to be called grab edge. So let's put in a new trigger and call it grab edge, like that. And for that trigger, we'll put it on this hanging idle. So let's just go over to transition, and we will turn off the exit time out of the jump, and at the same time add in our grab edge trigger. We now need to consider how we're going to cause this grab edge to actually trigger, and we need to create some code for that, but you also need an event that will make that happen. So in this case, I'm going to add a collider. So let's go back to our scene. We need to add something that we're going to hit with the bot that will make that animation play. Now, it's going to play when we're near the edge and we jump up onto this or near this bar. So if we create with that container selected, which is container 1, let's just create a 3D object cube that will be attached to it, and just move it out a bit until you can see it. You want to make it quite large, because this will dictate where you can jump and catch hold of those bars at the top there. So let's just bring it down, and we'll just move it out a little bit like that. The actual position of it we can figure out later, but essentially the bot has to be able to walk up to it and push its arms in that. So you can actually just practice by playing and then getting close and then jumping up. And when you jump up, your hands or your bot will actually go through that collider. Right, so the next thing we're going to do is create something on the bot that's going to collide with this particular cube. Now, we don't want the bot's capsule collider to be triggering the event for this, because that would mean that every time you walked up near this container, if your head hit it, you would go and trigger your grab edge. But you don't want grab edge to be triggered unless you're actually already jumping up as though you're trying to reach that bar. Right, so what we'll do, first of all, with that cube selected on the container, turn off the, don't turn it off, turn on the is trigger for that box collider. That will now allow you to walk right up to the edge of the container, and your head in this case will go through it. And you might want to lift that up a bit later. Remember, with any of these particular colliders, we will come back and turn off the mesh renderer on there so that it doesn't become visible when you're playing the game, because you only want it there as a trigger object. Right, now how are we going to trigger the bot's jumping with this particular cube? Well, what we actually need is a colliding object that will hit this when our arms move, and that means we need to attach something to our bot's hands. If you come into the hierarchy and have a look through your Y bot, you'll find the actual skeleton of your Y bot under a Mixamo rig hips, because this is a Mixamo character and that's just what it's called. Let me just move around so we can see it. So this is the hip node or the center of the skeleton, and you're looking for the arms. So the arms are going to be attached to the spine. So if we just work down through the spine, we can go to the right hand until we find it. There's the right hand, and on the right hand you've got all of the fingers in that. To the right hand, just select it and right click 3D object and go sphere. Now that's going to attach a sphere to our arm, or I should say to our hand. it's very large at this point. So with it selected, you can just resize it. Again, this is something that you will remove the mesh renderer of. Now, if you play it at this point and just walk around, you'll see that that sphere is quite neatly attached to that wrist point or that hand. If you want to move it down, you can select it, hit W, and just modify where it actually is, whether it's actually on the end of the fingers or right on the hand. Okay, so you've now got one sphere collider there. You want to do the same thing with the other. So if we go down the left shoulder, there's our left hand, right click, 3D object sphere, hit the R key to resize it down, and then hit W just to move it down. Okay, so now we've got two colliders on the hands that we can walk up to here, jump up, they will go through, hit this box, and now we can program something to trigger with those. Now, so that the bot itself, its capsule collider, doesn't trigger this particular cube here, what I'm going to do is just resize it a bit to make it a bit shorter than the bot and move it up. Now, you could test for the particular object that's hit this collider, like we have in past tutorials, by tagging the hands and then testing for the object that had hit. But I'm just going to keep it simple. So at this point, if I just rock up to this cube and let's just select our bot, we can see that in the scene, the bot's collider is down here and this cube is up here. All right, so let's now add some code to deal with the collision of that. Now, we'll go back to our climb up function, code. At the top, I'm going to add a new function in, and this function will get called when we collide with that cube. So I'll just paste that in here. Now, it's a public function, which means that it's accessible outside of this code from another object, and it's going to be called grab edge. And when this function gets fired, you can see that it does a number of things, including setting that grab edge trigger for us, which will cause the hanging animation to occur. Now, at the same time, it's also checking to see if you're already hanging. Okay, so if you are hanging, then it's going to return because it doesn't want to grab the edge twice. So the first time that this runs, is hanging will be false, and it will ignore that line. It will come and trigger everything it needs to and then set the hanging to true, which will stop this continually firing for you. At the same time, it's turning off the rigid body that is on your character. Now, that is so while the character is hanging and doing the hanging animations, we're not going to have the physics system mucking around with our character and pushing it around. And this is a really good idea because that physics system will actually interfere with the way you're trying to do stuff with your character in mid-air. So by setting is kinematic to true, it actually leaves your character in the physics system but doesn't have it affected by physics objects, so that when your character is hanging and if it sort of rocks and back and forwards and hits something, it's not going to affect it. And then at the same time, as we do this grab edge, we're telling our character what our root target is, and remember that root target is our anchor that we're going to have align our character's body to, so that it looks like the character is actually hanging from the rail that's on top of that container. Right, so that's the grab edge function that's in here. Now, it has to get run when the collision occurs on that cube. So save that and just close that. What we're going to do is create some new code. So go create C#. This one we'll call trigger grabbing, and just open up that new file, and we'll enter a really simple function into here that will allow us to run that grab edge when the spheres on the hand collide with the box along the top of the container. So we're going to remove the contents of this function, this class, and let's replace it with this code here. We'll have a game object root position, which is our anchor position, which we will define with the use of another cube in a moment. And then we're going to use an on trigger enter function, which is like an on collision, except it uses the triggers, so that when the spheres on the hand go through the cube here, this one along the top of the container, it's going to make this code run. And at that point, it's going to grab the object or the parent of the object that was hit. So here we grab the spheres that hit the collider, and then it goes and uses the code to grab the parent that belongs to those spheres, which in this case is our bot. It then looks inside the climb up code and runs the grab edge function and tells it about the position of our anchor. Right, so save that. This code gets attached to that big long cube that we just created. So select the cube, which is this one here, and drag and drop the trigger code onto it. Okay, now you can see that it's after the root position or the anchor position, which we don't have at the moment. So we need to add another cube in here that we can use to anchor our character. So select the container again and right click on it and 3D object cube. We'll create another cube in this scene. Let's just bring that out, and I'm going to put it over here. And I'll just resize it a bit. Remember, it's only the position that is really important for this, not the size of that cube. Okay, so with that cube created, so let's just rename that in the hierarchy, anchor. And then go back to the cube that has our trigger grabbing script on it. Get hold of the anchor and drag and drop that for the root position. Now, just before we test this, we need to make sure that the anchor is itself not a collider. So get rid of the collider box on that anchor because you don't want your character to run into it. It's only there for the position and rotation of your anchor. Right, so let's just run this. Walk up to there and jump up. Right, now what happened there? We triggered a grab edge because we've now anchored our character to that box. But what's happened is that the character is seemingly rotated, but if you have a look at this particular cube here, you can see that it's actually not rotated properly. Its y-axis, which is the green axis, is facing out this way, and that's because it's a child of this container, which is also at a funny angle. So we need to rotate this particular anchor cube back up again. So let's just stop playing. This anchor cube, we can rotate it, let's say 90 around the Y. So just using that in the inspector, and now it's facing up. So if we run this now, we should go along, jump up, and we're now hanging. Now you'll notice there was that lerping that happened there as well. Okay, so now if we just move our character around a little bit while we're still in play mode, you can see that we're anchored to this cube, but it's not quite right. So if we grab hold of the anchor while we're in play mode and hit the W key, we can actually just move it around until we get our character hanging nicely on that top bar. Okay, that's better. Now, you don't want to stop playing at this point because it will take the cube back to where it was. So if you, while you're still running, click on the anchor and then go to this little cog wheel in the inspector, you can drop that down and go copy component, which is off the screen here. You can't see it, but in that list is copy component. And then stop playing and everything will go back to where it was. But with that anchor selected, you go back to the cog and go paste component values, which will realign that box. And now when we walk up to it and jump, we will be anchored and positioned to be hanging on that bar.